Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. State of Grace, 1990, Movie Review. State of Grace is a 1990 American neo-noir drama film directed by Joanou and starring Sean Penn, Ed Harris, Gary Oldman, Robin Wright, John Turturro, and John C. Reilly. Written by playwright Dennis McIntyre, the film was produced by Ned Dowd, Randy Ostrow, and Ron Rotholz, with a musical score by Ennio Morricone. Although the film was not a box office success and its release overshadowed by that of the similarly themed Goodfellas, it was received positively by most critics. Shot on location in New York City, the film was inspired by the real-life Hell's Kitchen gang, the Westies. Irish-American Terry Noonan returns to Hell's Kitchen in New York City after a long absence, where his unpredictable childhood friend Jackie Flannery is involved in an Irish crime organization run by older brother Frank. Terry rekindles an old relationship with Jackie's sister Kathleen. Terry is actually an undercover cop and confesses it to Kathleen. She is reluctant to have anything to do with him after being told by her brother Frank that Terry is now a member of his gang after killing 2 people, although Terry explains to Kathleen the killing was staged by his police boss Nick, with blanks used. Jackie is drinking in a bar one night when 3 members of a rival Italian gang enter. Suspecting their involvement in the killing of his friend, Stevie, Jackie snaps and ends up killing all 3 for intruding on his gang's territory. Frank is summoned to a meeting with Italian mafia boss Joe Borelli and is told he must kill his brother Jackie. Frank has told his men to lie in wait in case the meeting goes wrong, and manages to avert a shootout by hugging the Italian leader outside the restaurant in full view of the gang, causing them to retreat. Frank arranges for Jackie to collect $25,000 after lying to him that the Italians are actually supporting them and that this is their reward, telling him to go to Battery Park. Terry tags along as Jackie's secret backup, finding that the location has been changed to Pier 84. As they wait at Pier 84, Frank arrives with his enforcer Pat Nicholson just as Terry has stepped away to frantically phone his police handlers to inform them that they have been sent to the wrong location. Frank shoots Jackie in cold blood. The police finally arrive and Terry tells Nick that he is quitting as an undercover operative. At Jackie's funeral, Terry reveals to Frank that he was at Pier 84 and also hands him his police badge. Hours later, while Kathleen is watching the St. Patrick's Day parade alone, Terry goes to the bar where Frank and his gang are. In a shootout, Frank and all of his men are killed. Having been shot 3 times, Terry slumps to the floor as the screen fades to black. In February 1989, it was reported that Dennis Hopper had signed on to direct State of Grace under the film's original title Westies. In May of that year, Bill Pullman was cast in the role of Frankie Flannery. Before cameras were set to roll on June 15, both Hopper and Pullman dropped out of the project. Joanou replaced Hopper as director and Ed Harris signed on to replace Pullman as Frankie. On February 1, 1990, the film's screenwriter Dennis McIntyre passed away while the film was still in post-production. In June of that year, Variety noted that Orion Pictures wanted to change the title of the film from Westies to Hell's Kitchen, but Joanou ultimately fought for State of Grace. The film was released on a limited basis on September 14, 1990. First week box office totaled $179,927, 14 screens. According to the Numbers website, the film was in circulation a few weeks and appeared on 335 screens in its widest release. Total receipts were $1,911,542. Ebert believed the difficulty State of Grace had at the box office was due to another film with the same theme being released the same week, Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas. State of Grace was generally well received by critics. Of the reviews collected from notable publications by popular review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an overall approval rating of 86% from 28 critics. The consensus summarizes, State of Grace brings an impressive ensemble cast to bear on its epic gangster saga, elevating a largely familiar story with outstanding performances. Janet Maslin, film critic for The New York Times, wrote, Mr. Joanou attempts to capture the sense of place that defines urban crime and the ethnic and territorial distinctions that give it shape. He is successful much of the time here. Maslin praised Oldman and Harris, writing, Jackie Flannery is played by the phenomenal Gary Oldman, who since Sid and Nancy has taken on a string of new accents and dramatic identities with stunning ease, and Jackie's icy older brother is played by Ed Harris with an eeriness to match Mr. Oldman's. Critic Vincent Leo praised Penn's performance, noting, while Oldman gets the accolades for his energetic performance, it is really Penn's inner demons that provides the film with the right amount of conflict, always letting us be aware that fine lines are the difference between life and death, as well as right and wrong, out in the streets of New York. Is Penn doing the noble thing by taking down the criminals, or is he a rat bastard, disowning himself from the way of life and people who helped him along the way? It's the question that makes him sick to the pit of his stomach, and Penn shows it in his face with almost every scene. Roger Ebert, film critic of the Chicago Sun-Times, felt the film begins as original and challenging but then turns into a story filled with familiar elements. He nevertheless awarded it 3 stars out of 4 and had particular praise for the work of Gary Oldman, writing, "Oldman's performance in the movie is the best thing about it. What's best about State of Grace is what's unique to it, the twisted vision of the Oldman character, who lives in a world of evil and betrayal and has somehow thought himself around to the notion that he is doing the right thing." State of Grace has been recognized as a cult classic. Actor Leonardo DiCaprio cited Oldman's performance as one of his inspirations, adding that it influenced an entire generation of actors. The original soundtrack was released on October 1, 1990, by MCA. The CD has 18 tracks, is 53 to 45 in length, and features a score composed, orchestrated, and conducted by Ennio Morricone. And what a crew of young men we have here. While most gangster movies have featured long-in-the-tooth, aging stars, State of Grace admirably went for youth. Already a UK star via Remembrance, Sid, and Nancy and Prick Up Your Ears, Gary Oldman made an electrifying transition to US cinema as wild boy Jackie Flannery, who keeps a selection of severed hands in his rooftop fridge to bamboozle cops with false fingerprints. His sister Kathleen, the Princess Bride's Robin Wright, doesn't know half of what Jackie gets up to, but older brother Frank, Ed Harris with hair, is the leader of a gang called the Westies, casually extorting money from local businesses by forcing them to buy overpriced and illicit contraband. Into this volatile mix arrives Terry Noonan, Sean Penn. Noonan was a childhood friend of Jackie, and the Flannerys have no idea that Noonan is an undercover cop investigating them, a situation complicated when Kathleen starts a slow-dancing courtship with Terry. As St. Patrick's Day looms, with bagpipes and street parades set to a plangent Ennio Morricone score, Terry's handler Detective Nick Richardson, John Turturro, implores Terry to clean out the snakes from the Irish diaspora, but the sudden death of goofball Stevie Maguire, John C. Reilly, adds a ticking clock to a dangerous scenario. At the box office, State of Grace suffered from being the other gangster film in the week of Goodfellas, but the macho machinations make it a stone-cold classic in its own right. That cast is a roll call of great actors, and you can throw in a bonus scene with Burgess Meredith stewing over his tomatoes. Dennis McIntyre's script covers all the bases for New York Irish, from Guns and Roses to Guinness to laundromats, seminaries, throat-slitting angels and weeping over saints. State of Grace is also a reminder of how recently New York was a war zone comparable to war-torn Beirut. It's all yuppie condos, they should leave 10 blocks for the Irish. We told of a narrative that ventures to such remote outposts as 43rd and Broadway. The boys dismiss the chic Kathleen as a suburban mutation of Laura Ashley, but she's the most sensible character here. Ever seen a dog explode? Jackie muses, asking the wrong questions, before a petulant murder spree kicked off to a Guns N' Roses soundtrack reminds him of the short life expectancy of a gangster's career. Finish them off with their spaghetti still on their spoons, is another pungent line here. While most gangster films are nostalgic throwbacks to serve an audience of old men, State of Grace updates, recycles and revitalizes cliches by firmly setting the narrative in the present, or at least 1990. The Hell's Kitchen neighborhood doesn't exist anymore, but the criminality has moved upstairs. Joanou's polished and urgent film shows how organized crime exists in the bricks and mortar of a city. Knocking down a few buildings doesn't change the complex nature of the people who inhabit American streets. State of Grace is not quite sure which is worse, murder, or yuppies moving into the neighborhood. That's one of its charms. The movie is so sincere and confused in its values that it mirrors the goofy loyalties and violent pathology of its characters. They're low-level Irish-American gangsters who operate in the Hell's Kitchen area of New York City, west of Times Square, and one measure of their success as gangsters is the fact that rising rents are forcing them out of the neighborhood. The movie opens with a reunion. Terry, Sean Penn, who used to live in the neighborhood, has been on the road for a few years. Now he's back in town, and embracing his best friend Jackie, Gary Oldman, in one of the sleazy saloons where gangsters and winos seem to be the only customers. Crime in this neighborhood is a family affair. The Irish gang is led by Jackie's older brother, Frankie, Ed Harris, who has moved to the suburbs and calls the shots from his middle-class house on a tree-lined street, far from the drug deals that pay his mortgage. The two brothers have a sister named Kathleen, Robin Wright, who has also tried to get out of the neighborhood. She works as a clerk in an uptown hotel. But she and Terry used to be in love, and so of course fate is going to have a hand in what happens next. Since a great deal of what happens in State of Grace depends on an important secret that is not revealed until the second half of the movie, I will have to tread gingerly around some of the details. But the most interesting aspect of the movie is right up front, the confused notion by Jackie that he is, in some way, protecting the neighborhood by committing crimes there. Although the gang's main business seems to be selling drugs, Frankie is willing to pull some jobs simply as a civic service. For example, he takes Terry along one night when he burns down a construction office on a site that will soon be a yuppie apartment building. Frankie is probably crazy, or maybe his mind has been completely addled by the drugs and booze he has channeled through it. His idea of making arson into fun is to pour the gasoline between himself and the door, and then see if he can run through it without killing himself. He also likes to hold target practice up on the roof. And he is capable of shocking, cold-blooded killing, as he shows in one of the movie's most surprising scenes, a reconciliation with the mafia that has an unexpected ending. Gary Oldman's performance in the movie is the best thing about it. Sean Penn is just as good an actor, but he has the lead, and there's not as much he can do with it. He has to be sane and tortured and conflicted, and battle with his opposing emotions. All standard screenplay stuff. Oldman's character is more pure. He acts only on the basis of his instincts and prejudices, or out of vengeance and fear. His character doesn't have to do the fancy footwork. There are moments in the film that are absolutely chilling, as when Ed Harris, who wanted to be at arm's length from the crimes committed for his profit, finds that he has to personally kill someone he loves. But the movie's plot paradoxically gets less and less original, the more complicated it becomes. At the outset, when it seems concerned only with the behavior of its characters, it's original and challenging. Then it turns into a story filled with familiar elements, and by the end everything is happening by the numbers. There's another problem. This movie, intended as a gritty slice of life about gangsters in New York City, is being released at about the same time as Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, which deals with the same subject and is a film so strong and graceful that few others can stand comparison to it. What's best about State of Grace is what's unique to it, the twisted vision of the Oldman character, who lives in a world of evil and betrayal and has somehow thought himself around to the notion that he is doing the right thing. For a few years in the late 1980s, director Phil Joanou was what we used to like to call hot shit. He went to USC Film School, was taken under the wing of Steven Spielberg, and then got to direct episodes of Amazing Stories. U2, at that time one of the biggest bands on the planet, asked Joanou to direct some of their music videos. Joanou's first feature film he directed was teen comedy 3 O'Clock High, 1987. That same year, U2 asked Joanou to direct their rockumentary Rattle and Hum, which would coincide with the release of their album of the same name. I recently rewatched Rattle and Hum because I was considering writing about it for this column. Ultimately, I decided not to, but let me say that while the band comes off as super pretentious, the live concert footage from various stadiums around the US is absolutely gorgeous. If there's a reason to watch that movie, it's the live stuff. Rattle and Hum, the movie, didn't do very well at the box office, but that didn't matter because in 1990 Joanou was given the helm of the movie we're discussing here, State of Grace. Sean Penn, Gary Oldman, and Ed Harris, that's quite the dream cast back in 1990. Just for kicks, they threw in John Turturro, Robin Wright, John C. Reilly and Burgess fucking Meredith. With a score by Ennio Morricone, I mean, come on. State of Grace quickly got lost in the very big shadow of Scorsese's Goodfellas, both films being released the same week, and there it pretty much remains, long forgotten by most people. That's a shame, really, because it doesn't deserve that fate, and I'm here to try and turn that around. Set in Hell's Kitchen, the movie follows Terry Noonan, Penn, as he comes back home after being away for many years. He looks up his old best pal from the neighborhood, Jackie Flannery, Oldman. Jackie works for his older brother Frank Harris, who is the leader of an Irish crime organization. The three reunite and Terry soon becomes involved in helping Jackie carry out jobs for Frank. Terry also reunites with Jackie's sister, Kathleen Wright. They were a couple before Terry left town, and they soon find themselves in each other's arms. Frank isn't happy with his piece of the pie that is Hell's Kitchen, he wants more, so he gets involved with an Italian mob boss Joe Vitarelli. Borelli asks Frank to do a job that seems beyond the pale, but Frank wants to please Borelli, so he goes through with it, causing the shit to hit the fan for all involved. State of Grace is a straight-up neo-noir, and Joanou works that for everything it's worth. I was recently discussing this movie with a friend, and I said I'd love to see this get the black and white treatment. A lot of the credit for the look of the film has to go to cinematographer Jordan Cronenweth, Blade Runner. There are some really gorgeous shots here. It ticks all the boxes as a neo-noir, including light and shadows, themes involving good versus bad / right versus wrong, and revenge. The Morricone score is terrific and lends itself well to the film. And yes, there are some U2 songs that play on jukeboxes, but don't let that take you out of it. Penn, Oldman, and Harris are really at the top of their game. Oldman's Jackie is tremendous. He does what it takes to protect his family, both by blood and by bond. It's really a joy to watch him work here. Harris is a stone-cold motherfucker. His Frank is the opposite of Jackie. He doesn't live by the code of loyalty to family like his brother does. Jackie wears his heart on his sleeve, whereas we don't know if Frank even has a heart. Penn seems to get overshadowed by the other two, but, really, he's got the hardest task of the three. He's walking a tightrope, dealing with so many different emotions. He's being pulled into different directions, and he's just struggling to stay the course. This is one of my favorite Penn roles. Robin Wright holds her own here against those three formidable men. Kathleen is in her own fight, dealing with divided loyalties, what her family means to her, and how Terry fits into it all. Special shout out for Burgess Meredith, who is only on screen for a short time, but he still gives everything he's got. Sadly, State of Grace doesn't seem to be available for streaming anywhere, but it is available on Blu-ray, so please seek this one out. Also, while you're at it, why not go for a Joanou double feature and check out Rattle and Hum, too? The mark of Cain rather than the tradition of St. Anthony is what animates the Irish Catholic gangster in State of Grace. Terry, Sean Penn, is an undercover cop who returns to his old neighborhood of New York's Hell's Kitchen to bring down the Irish street gang he left behind years ago. Although the Catholic tradition of their childhood is available to these wayward souls, they serve the gods of lawlessness, betrayal, and violence. The Irish gang, headed by Frankie Flannery, Ed Harris, after watching their neighborhood succumb to gentrification, have joined forces with the Italian mafia. Only trouble is that Jackie, Gary Oldman, Frankie's out-of-control brother, refuses to get with the new program. He enjoys beating up people, torching buildings, and letting the Italians know that he's not their lackey. Terry's feelings get in the way of his mission when he falls in love with Kathleen Flannery, Robin Wright, a stubborn woman who has unsuccessfully tried to distance herself from her bloodthirsty brothers and their dirty deeds. For the late screenplay writer, Dennis McIntyre, and director Phil Joanou, these characters all bear the mark of Cain. An old man, who knows them well, tells Terry, "They're black snakes, they'll all turn on anybody." The emotional dynamite in the performances by the outstanding cast lifts State of Grace a notch above the traditional gangster movie. In September of 1990, a mere week before the release of Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, another drama about modern New York mobsters opened in U.S. theaters. State of Grace was not based on true crime or a best-selling novel like The Godfather, whose film saga concluded later that same year. Instead, it used the first and only original screenplay of Dennis McIntyre, a New York playwright who died at 47 of stomach cancer while the movie was in post-production. State of Grace opens with Terry Noonan, Sean Penn, agreeing to perform a drug deal. The exchange of money for narcotics goes awry and two are killed. Terry drifts into a bar where he reconnects with Jackie Flannery, Gary Oldman, an old friend he hasn't seen in years. 12 years, in fact. Despite the estrangement, Terry is swiftly welcomed back into the Hell's Kitchen Irish-American crime family that is now being run by Jackie's older brother Frankie, Ed Harris. Oddly, no one asks where Terry has been or why he's reappearing here now. The movie delays answering those pressing yet unasked questions until 50 minutes in, by which point Terry has become a trusted member of the Flannery gang, reconnected with Jackie and Frankie's sister Kathleen, Robin Wright, who maintains her distance as a manager at an upscale hotel, and had an old childhood friend, John C. Reilly, in one of his earlier credits, also with the family found dead over an $8,000 debt. That hit is performed out of respect to the unpaid party, the head of a neighboring territory's Italian-American crime family with whom there is some bad blood. But the nature of the crime is kept hidden from Terry and the grungy, hot-headed Jackie, both of whom are broken up by it. Their respective responses escalate the tensions between the two families, putting them on the brink of a turf war. State of Grace was the third feature credit of director Phil Joanou, who had previously helmed the appealing high school comedy 3 O'Clock High, 1987, and the U2 documentary Rattle and Hum, 1988. State would move Joanou in a darker direction, something he has maintained in a filmmaking career consisting of sporadic fringe to mid-level thrillers like Kim Basinger's Final Analysis, 1992, and Alec Baldwin's Heaven's Prisoners, 1996. Joanou is scheduled to pick up his first feature directing credit in nearly a decade on the upcoming horror movie The Veil starring Jessica Alba and Thomas Jane. The director's best-known work may be the somewhat well-regarded Dwayne Johnson juvenile delinquent football drama Gridiron Gang. Despite boasting interesting performances from a number of actors who have stayed relevant and respected to this day, State has largely been forgotten by the public a quarter-century after its release. It's tempting to say that State was eclipsed by Goodfellas, but that film took a while to earn its classic status, whereas State was largely dead on arrival, expanding to 192 theaters on Goodfellas opening day, but being unable to get anywhere close to the weekly top 10 amidst such films as Ghost, Flatliners, Presumed Innocent, Darkman, and Young Guns 2. State is an altogether different beast from the flavorful and stylish Goodfellas. Though nearly as filled with profanity, it is a relatively austere and somber production, at least until its improbable yet inevitable finale. While it sneaks in some recognizable songs from Guns N' Roses, The Rolling Stones, and U2, whose music videos McIntyre often directed throughout the 90s and into the noughties, it relies more frequently on a classical score by Ennio Morricone. That sound may invite comparisons to Sergio Leone's epic Once Upon a Time in America, but in other ways, State resembles a gritty 1970s movie. The New York it depicts at the start of the 90s is closer to the one seen in Scorsese's Mean Streets and Taxi Driver than the revitalized, family-friendly one to emerge from Rudy Giuliani's century-ending mayorship. Apart from an eruption and a breakdown, Penn plays the protagonist with understatement. As such, he is overshadowed by the firecracker Oldman, then still on the cusp of recognizability. Even if the movie's depiction of criminals doesn't seem grounded in reality or research, one enforcer eats a handful of nuts immediately after killing somebody. Harris had already found the rhythm and intensity that continues to enable him to stand out in a unique way. On the other hand, Wright isn't convincing as a crime family sister preferring the safety of legitimacy. Equidistant from her more lighthearted two landmark credits, The Princess Bride and Forrest Gump, this film's biggest significance to her is for introducing her to Penn, sparking a relationship that would produce 2 children, pregnancies requiring her to bow out of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves and The Firm, and a 14-year marriage quite long by Hollywood standards. State of Grace grossed just $1.9 million in theaters, which was still several times more than what The Boondock Saints, a film whose Irish-American crime depictions it now calls to mind, would gross in super-limited theatrical release 10 years later. Naturally, this product of the long-defunct Orion Pictures has made its way to Blu-ray from Twilight Time, the boutique label that has been happy to handle many an MGM library cast-off. Several years ago, some clever critic whose name presently escapes me wrote that the only time in the history of Ireland that everyone agreed on anything was when word got out that Kevin Costner might land the starring role in Michael Collins. Though I do not feel anything even vaguely resembling the sense of cultural outrage when the names Leonardo DiCaprio, Tom Hanks, and Paul Newman come up, I must confess to a certain confusion as to why actors who do not look even vaguely Celtic are suddenly popping up in movies about Irish Americans. After all, there are about 50 million of us over here in the US, more than 10 times the population of Ireland. Did somebody lose Sean Penn's phone number? The films to which I am referring are Sam Mendes's stylish, absurd Road to Perdition and Martin Scorsese's long-awaited Gangs of New York. In the former, a film about feuding bootleggers that is set in the American Midwest during the Great Depression, Tom Hanks plays a thoroughly professional Irish-American hitman who has a falling out with his mentor and surrogate father, played by Paul Newman. After Newman's son, also an Irish-American, murders Hanks's wife and oldest boy, Hanks takes his remaining boy, age 12, on an interesting road trip, teaching him the meaning of being a man while roaming around the Midwest knocking over crooked banks that are secretly hoarding the filthy lucre of arch-criminal Al Capone. Ultimately, the boy decides that even though his father obviously has some serious moral shortcomings, he is a great guy to hang out with. In Gangs of New York, which will be released in the US on Christmas Day, DiCaprio, who does not look Irish, plays a feisty Irish immigrant who leads an insurgency against entrenched nativist forces led by Daniel Day-Lewis. Day-Lewis, ironically, does look Irish, and has played Irish characters in the past in My Left Foot, The Boxer, The Last of the Mohicans, Only Joking. Because the troubled, rumor-plagued Gangs of New York is still being edited down to a manageable size, and is in the process of having a new score written for it, we have no idea where it fits into the Scorsese canon. We only know this: Daniel Day-Lewis is a lot more convincing as a person of Irish ancestry than Leonardo DiCaprio. For that matter, so is Robert De Niro. This curious casting conjures up memories of bygone times when bloodthirsty Comanche and Kiowa warriors were invariably played by paunchy Jewish and Italian character actors, or when omnipotent Persian sultans were played by pasty-faced British schoolboys. It is almost as if Hollywood is making up for years of casting Laurence Olivier as the second coming of Muhammad, in Khartoum, or John Wayne as Genghis Khan, in The Conqueror, or Frank Sinatra as Spain's most emaciated partisan in The Pride and the Passion, by forcing Irish Americans to take their licks. Mind you, there is no law that says that actors can only play characters from their own ethnic groups. Marlon Brando, the most famous on-screen Sicilian of them all, is not of Italian heritage, Anthony Quinn is not Greek, Gwyneth Paltrow is not English, Joaquin Phoenix is not Roman, Anthony Hopkins does not hail from Picasso's Barcelona. But a conspicuous failure to pay heed to ethno-cultural verisimilitude can often lead to misfortune. Jean Triplehorn was spectacularly unconvincing as a mafia scionist in Mickey Blue Eyes, and Michael Caine was perhaps the least persuasive Nazi stormtrooper ever in The Eagle Has Landed. Nor was Rod Steiger especially credible in the role of Napoleon Bonaparte in Waterloo. And how the hell did Tony Curtis wind up in Taras Bulba? Because the rise of the Irish in America coincided so neatly with the rise of the motion picture industry, Irish Americans have always been linchpins of the art form, i.e., there are a lot of us, and we like seeing ourselves up on the silver screen. But the vast majority of films starring James Cagney, Tyrone Power, Pat O'Brien, and other members of the post-Leprechaun Irish American subculture are not about the Irish per se. The actors merely happen to be Irish Americans playing charismatic characters in movies. They had already been assimilated into the mythical American melting pot. Moreover, the Irish have been mercifully spared the ceaseless ethnic stereotyping that has afflicted Italian Americans and African Americans. Many Italian Americans loathe films like Goodfellas and The Godfather, and are deeply disturbed by the negative cachet attached to Italian American gangsters in The Sopranos. It doesn't help that Italian Americans are the ones who keep making these films. And affluent Black Americans, a group the media studiously refuses to deal with, have had it up to here with cretinous films about boys in the hood. If the boys want to stay in the hood, let them. Anyone with half a brain is moving to the suburbs. In the golden age of Hollywood, Irish Americans got off a lot better than most other ethnic groups. In films such as Going My Way and The Bells of St. Mary, the radiantly Celtic Bing Crosby scattered his fairy dust around the sidewalks of New York, and everyone thought that was just swell. The Irish in America were also portrayed as possessing a kind of proletarian nobility in films as varied as In Old Chicago, Fort Apache, and She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, where the reliable sergeants were always played by the likes of Ward Bond and Victor McLaglen. Even in Angels with Dirty Faces, where Cagney and O'Brien played ruffians whose career paths take hugely divergent turns, one becomes a criminal, the other a priest, the Irish came off looking pretty good. But in recent times, my ethnic group has taken a definite turn for the worse on the silver screen. Ed Harris and Gary Oldman were chilling psychopaths in State of Grace, which starred Sean Penn as an undercover cop forced to infiltrate the gang that has terrorized his Hell's Kitchen neighborhood for time immemorial, but is now ceding power to the Italians. Indeed, everything about State of Grace, an underrated film, illuminates what is wrong with Road to Perdition, an overrated one. What Harris brings to the screen in Phil Joanou's 1990 film is the mixture of charm and cruelty that typifies Irish American males. For more information, ask me about my father, my uncles, my grandfathers, the whole crew. Hanks, who does not seem to have a nasty bone in his body, simply cannot convey the ability of the clannish, vindictive Irish-American male to turn on a dime and transform one's closest friend into one's worst enemy. When Hanks goes back to seek a reckoning with Newman, who is equally unconvincing as an Irish gangster, at the end of the film, he is almost contrite. Harris would have blown Newman's brains out first, then had the chit-chat. Ditto Gary Oldman. Ditto Sean Penn. The other developing theme in recent films centering on Irish Americans is the kind of revolting paddywhackery that the Irish themselves find so infuriating. Several years ago, I wrote an article called Blarney Stoned for Movie Line in which I attempted to determine which was the most absurdly stereotypical Hibernian film in the history of cinema. Basically, there were two kinds of motion pictures in this genre, those centering on the Irish Republican Army, and those focusing on the wee, canny, lovable Irish people who always had a bounce in their step and a song in their hearts. The first group included everything from The Informer to Odd Man Out to Cal to Michael Collins. The second group included The Field, The Legend of Roan Inish, The Quiet Man, Far and Away, and even The Commitments. By and large, the IRA films tend to be engrossing if predictable, while the second group tend to be sappy and even more predictable, films in which the pipes never stop calling from glen to glen, making anyone of Irish or Irish-American ancestry desperate to get the next plane out of Carrickfergus leaving for Santa Monica. My father never forgave Fred Astaire for his turn as a leprechaun marooned in the Deep South in Francis Ford Coppola's whimsical, awful Finian's Rainbow. Neither have I. Still, as I pointed out at the time, the most ludicrous Irish film of them all was The Brothers McMullen, set in Queens. Massively hyped at the time because it was allegedly made for about £20,000, Ed Burns' directorial debut was the kind of self-involved indie flick in which the Irish-American protagonists could not brush their teeth or start their car without first wolfing down a keg of Guinness and putting on a Notre Dame Fighting Irish sweatshirt. In this type of movie, ethnicity is a kind of fetish involving beverages, sports, clothing, Catholicism. And nothing more. Ironically, misguided paddywhackery is the subtext of Alan J. Pakula's 1998 film The Devil's Own. Here, Brad Pitt, not to be confused with Jerry Adams, played a dedicated IRA operative who has come to New York to buy an arsenal of weapons to be used against the British troops. Another underrated motion picture, The Devil's Own, drives home the point that while stateside Celtic pride largely consists of listening to chieftains' music and visiting saloons, being in the IRA is real. Brutally contrasting affluent Irish Americans, who think terrorism is a sort of lark, with real Irish terrorists in this case, one whose father was gunned down before his very eyes by Protestant gunmen. The Devil's Own is one of the few movies to get things right. That is, war is not a pastime. The chasm that exists between the Irish and Irish Americans is vast. We have all the money, we have all the power, we have all the really good civil service jobs, we buy all the Clannad records. In Belfast, things are somewhat different. Which brings us back to Gangs of New York. When I first saw the trailer for Scorsese's troubled, overdue, hugely expensive epic about the hatred directed toward immigrants in 19th century New York, I couldn't help guffawing at the casting of Leonardo DiCaprio as an Irish navvy. But then I recalled the remarkable Italian film Francesco, in which Mickey Rourke plays St. Francis of Assisi. Maybe Scorsese is simply trying to even the score. State of Grace was released in late 1990 when fascination with the Westies of Hell's Kitchen in New York was at its peak. Though the movie is quick to point out the horror and pointlessness of much of the violence that happened during the era of the 1970s and 1980s when the Westies were in their heyday, it's loath to judge their actions with crudely drawn character or platitudes. Instead, State of Grace is a richly crafted character-driven thriller that's just as much about man's need to belong as it is a eulogy for an era of New York now long gone, when neighborhoods in Manhattan were still home to long-stayed ethnic groups with their own codes of conduct and standards of justice. The so-called Westies were a loose gang of Irish criminals that operated on the west side of New York City in the area known as Hell's Kitchen. They ran gambling, loan sharking, bookmaking, and drug-dealing operations since the 1960s in the chunk of Manhattan north of 34th Street and south of 59th Street. Chipping away at their strength in the late 80s were the dual forces of gentrification and prosecution, which forced law-abiding citizens of the area into cheaper boroughs and the criminally minded into jail or out of town. Released the same year as State of Grace was T.J. English's excellent book The Westies, a thorough study of the neighborhood from the turn of the century that follows both the main criminal players of the gang and their law enforcement counterparts with world-weary objectivity and humor. Some of English's The Westies makes its way into State of Grace, albeit in a heavy fictionalized form. Sean Penn stars as Terry Noonan, a neighborhood kid who ditched Hell's Kitchen as soon as he was of age and is now returning to claim his spot in the fray. His best friend Jackie is a dying breed, an enthusiastic product of the neighborhood that thrives in his criminal element and sneers at the encroaching gentrification. Yuppies gotta be thicker than the rats and the roaches. Jackie is played by Gary Oldman, who infuses his character with unpredictable electricity and steals every scene. Terry tries to pick up where he left off with his old flame Kate, Robin Wright, who like Terry ditched the neighborhood and is working a straight job uptown. He begins working for Jackie's older brother Frankie, Ed Harris, who's the new boss of Hell's Kitchen but still uneasy in his role. Trying to smooth the rough edges of the crew's reputation, Frankie has made several inroads to the Italian mafia and is attempting to broker a partnership between the Irish and the Italians, not unlike real-life Westie leader Jimmy Coonan. A major transition happens with Penn's character about 45 minutes into the film, and we learn that Terry's motives for returning to his old neighborhood aren't as clear-cut as they first appeared. The anxiety of a world in flux is palpable in every scene, with each character's own internal conflicts bouncing off the tension felt by a neighborhood's traditions being threatened by the global economy. "They don't even want to call it Hell's Kitchen no more," cries Jackie. Oldman's character is the only one in the film who is completely sure of himself and what his role is in life, and is also the character who's most comfortable with casual violence, arson, and murder. When things go sideways with Frankie's deal with the Italians, everyone's true motivations come to light and violence ensues. The gang tears each other apart just in time for the Giuliani era to be ushered in, paving the neighborhood's old traditions and sins under new condo blocks and bistros that are the landscape of 21st century Hell's Kitchen. Though the film describes a very specific time in New York's history, there are no trappings of any period that causes the movie to appear dated or stale. Adding to the timelessness is an understated score by Ennio Morricone and brown tones layered by cinematographer Jordan Cronenweth that ground the movie in sedate reality. State of Grace serves as a wake for an era of New York long past, and for a restrained style of crime film that would die in the explosion of ultraviolence a few years later with Quentin Tarantino and natural-born killers. Terry Noonan, Sean Penn, is an undercover cop who has returned to his old home of Hell's Kitchen, New York, after being away for a certain amount of years. And soon he gets in touch with his old friend Jackie, Gary Oldman, who gets Terry involved with the Irish mob, led by Jackie's brother, Frankie, Ed Harris. And soon Terry gets involved in some pretty intense stuff. From this we get a surprisingly investing and very well-told mob story. There are a few surprises strewn throughout the plot that really helped keep my interest. I'm not saying that they're mind-blowing twists, but they were most defiantly a little surprising. So yeah, the plot here is really solid. I admit, the characters in this movie aren't the most original when it comes to what type of character they all are. But I was definitely interested in all of them. Sean Penn is great as Terry, he perfectly plays this conflicted undercover cop. Ed Harris is great as the mob boss, but you knew that already, it's Ed fucking Harris. Gary Oldman in this movie is fantastic, playing this very unhinged man. Really, he's a blast to watch. Robin Wright plays the sister of Harris/Oldman that gets romantically involved with Terry, and she's great in the role. Then we also get some really good supporting performances from people like John Turturro and John C. Reilly. A solid cast giving great performances, me likey. The score for the movie was composed by the legendary Ennio Morricone, and he delivered some pretty great tunes, like he always does. The music is dramatic, tense, and it worked very well for the movie. And it just overall sounds great, because Ennio Morricone can do no wrong. The movie was directed by Phil Joanou and Michael Lee Barron, and they did a really solid job. Scenes flow smoothly and everything is just overall well handled. I of course also have to mention that the cinematography by Jordan Cronenweth looks great. But what else should one expect from the man who did the cinematography for Blade Runner? One final thing I also want to mention is that this movie contains one of the coolest shootouts that I have ever seen. It's very late in the movie, but the wait is so worth it. The mix of visuals and sound is really great. It's also really violent, so if you are squeamish you might not be the biggest fan. State of Grace is one of those gritty, hard-hitting crime thrillers that quietly came and went when it was released in theaters back in 1990, undoubtedly overshadowed by the colossus that is Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas. And while the two films couldn't be any more different, they complement each other in an odd way, call it gangster classicism from the 90s with some modern twists to keep things interesting. Without question the finest film of Phil Joanou's eclectic career, State of Grace has become a cult favorite over the years, thanks to a trio of blazing performances from Sean Penn, Ed Harris, and Gary Oldman, with Robin Wright, John C. Reilly, John Turturro, and Joe Vitarelli providing excellent and colorful support. Everyone came to play and offered up passionate work, which makes the emotional and visceral stakes all that much higher during the engrossing story. Bringing in less than $2 million at the box office after never making it out onto anything more than 350 screens, State of Grace is a hot-blooded crime noir that combines the undercover cop narrative with the feuding mobster scenario, and the results are explosive, deadly, and extremely entertaining, especially the performances from the three big leads, with Penn doing inner demons better than ever, and Oldman and Harris sinking their teeth into some nasty genre creations. Screenwriter Dennis McIntyre never rushed through any of the events in his propulsive narrative, and as a result, none of the characters were ever shortchanged. And while reminiscent of other films, State of Grace has enough personal flavor to allow it stand out in a crowded genre. I really think this was a project that suffered from an ill-timed and underpromoted release. The technical contributions to this production are outstanding. Ennio Morricone's elegant and operatic score heightens the mood in every scene, brings swells of intensity to the dramatic sequences, while underscoring the bits of violent action with even more sonic punch. Jordan Cronenweth's smoky, moody, and stylized cinematography caught all of the violent shootouts with dazzling finesse. It always helps when you enlist the guy who shot Blade Runner and Cutter's Way as your director of photography. And the fantastic production design by Deb Craner and Patricia von Brendenstein made perfect use of NYC locations, featuring authentic Italian and Irish neighborhoods, which gave the entire piece a level of credibility that other crime films can sorely lack. When you think of 1990 mafia films, Goodfellas and The Godfather Part 3 inevitably spring to mind. While one is rightly lauded as one of the greatest films ever made, the other is just as well remembered for being a poor conclusion to its critically acclaimed predecessors. State of Grace fell somewhere in the middle, meaning it remained largely anonymous upon its release and unheard of to most. It's a shame, because while it isn't anywhere near the quality of Goodfellas, there's some fantastic elements to this that should make it more recognized, chiefly the acting from its three leads, Sean Penn, Ed Harris and, in particular, Gary Oldman. Not to mention a fresh-faced Claire Underwood, Robin Wright. It starts with Terry Noonan, Penn, returning to his old NYC digs, Hell's Kitchen, after a 10-year hiatus in Boston, but what he's doing back remains largely mysterious. He reacquaints himself with his old pals, brothers Jackie and Frankie Flannery, Oldman and Harris, and their sister Kathleen, Wright, whom he had a previous thing with. It becomes apparent that he's now a cop working undercover to infiltrate the Flannerys, as Frankie is looking to establish his Irish crime organization. Unfortunately for Frankie, brother Jackie is a bit of loose cannon and stirs up trouble with the rival Italian mafia, showing Noonan that nothing will get in the way of obtaining power, even family. Let's start with the positive. The acting is first class. A young Penn gives a convincing, understated performance as the naive and conflicted Noonan, while Oldman clearly set the standard for himself with a hyperactive display of an alcoholic psychopath, arguably a career best. As close friends they are chalk and cheese, but their rapport complements each other throughout the film. Then there's Harris, probably the most underrated actor in Hollywood, and here he just oozes menace with his steely blue eyes. But unfortunately there's only so much actors can do to carry a picture. To give a film, and a gangster one at that, higher status, there has to be a story worth being told. And this is where the film falls down. Flat, in fact. The plot lacks scope and there's not any real depth to our main characters. There's no sympathy for Noonan as the undercover officer. John Turturro makes an appearance as his superior, as his actions mainly puts himself in jeopardy. We know that Frankie wants power, but we don't know how far along he's established. The gang is based on the real-life Irish mafia, the Westies. It only has him having showdowns with his own people, and the one time there's a chance for him to display any real supremacy outside of his group, he goes for a hug. Basically, he's not a very good mob boss. Not only that, the final standoff is bitterly disappointing. It's well crafted and edited, but it also enforces how inept Frankie and his whole group are, missing shot after shot at one target, and all at the same time. However, there are a couple of memorable scenes with some nice tension, and the most watchable and intriguing parts are when the main characters are paired off with each other, none more so than Penn and Wright, who have some sizzling chemistry, not surprisingly as they continued the romance off-screen. With a haunting score by legendary composer Ennio Morricone, up against the backdrop of New York City, State of Grace should have been held in higher regard. It's confined to being a hidden gem, despite its flaws. That's largely a show reel for its talent. State of Grace suffers by comparison with The Departed, 2006. Both concern American-Irish gangs, both narratives have crime families infiltrated by a cop familiar with the life. Obviously they aren't carbon copies, with The Departed set in Boston and State of Grace in Hell's Kitchen, New York, and so on, but close enough in feeling that you sit there picking flaws. Terry, a young cop recruited to infiltrate a gang from his hometown, re-enters a life he tried to put behind him. He is reacquainted with his old friend, Jackie, to work with Jackie's father, Frankie, a small-time crime boss who is trying to get in with the Italian mob. His loyalties are tested as the strain of hiding his real identity from all around him plays on his conscience, alongside the love Terry has for Jackie's sister, Kathleen. Gary Oldman, as Jackie, is the star of this picture. Madcap and high-wire the majority of the time, he is seemingly drunk or hungover in all of his scenes. He's the family loose cannon who is unaware of how his continual screw-ups are affecting those around him. Whether it's amusingly keeping hands in a freezer so a friend can use the fingerprints when using his favorite gun, to his 100-yard dash, the film falters when he's not on screen. Sean Penn as Terry has to be the film's straight man to Oldman's Jackie, shouldering the picture's conflict and grief at the role he plays. Sour-faced even when spending time with Robin Wright's Kathleen, and shadowed by an annoying incessant score, Penn is never more than good, especially in scenes with the brilliant Gary Oldman. Robin Wright is the moral center, a Flannery family member, who isn't given much to do beyond shout and get upset and judge everyone involved. Her and Jackie exist as two sides of the same coin for Terry to flip between. Ed Harris, as crime boss Frankie Flannery, the target of Penn's Terry, gives suitable menace and not much else. Oh, and let's not forget John C. Reilly in a small role as an Irish hoodlum. State of Grace is a minor gangster film that seems to have been forgotten over the years, so much so that Ed Harris admits his minor surprise about being asked to talk about it in the interview. It came out the same week as Goodfellas, and it's certainly not in that league by any means, but it has its own virtues, and that film's box office success basically kicked State of Grace out of theaters. The film really comes into its own because, due to its exceptional cast spearheaded by Sean Penn and Gary Oldman, who is really at the top of his game. Sean Penn plays a Terry Noonan, comes back to his old neighborhood of Hell's Kitchen, New York City, and hooks up with his old friend Jackie Flannery, Gary Oldman, who is involved with the local Irish mob. Frankie's brother Frankie, Ed Harris, is the gangster who runs the mob, and Sean hookups up with his ex-love Kathleen, who is Frankie and Jackie's sister, but little do they know he is actually an undercover cop, so everything gets complicated. Gary Oldman is really at the height of his career. The next year he would star as Lee Harvey Oswald in JFK, and he is chewing the scenery slightly, but it's an impressive performance, and the character's alcoholism really comes through the way Oldman just moves in the film. Sean Penn was trying to move into darker, more serious roles at the time, which he is now best known for, and you can certainly tell that he is on the road to bigger and better things on the basis of this performance. Ed Harris almost didn't do the film because of being exhausted after making The Abyss, but finally agreed in the week before to do the film, and it's one of his earliest villainous roles, and you can certainly see how he would get cast later in Cronenberg's gangster film A History of Violence on the strength of this performance. U2 were originally set to score the film because Joanou directed their concert film Rattle and Hum and many music videos for Bongo, The Hedge, and the other two. U2 were recording Actin' Baby, so they were forced to bow out, so Joanou asked the Italian maestro composer Ennio Morricone to do the score, and he agreed, and brings the film a big epic feel. Jordan Cronenweth, who shot Blade Runner along with Stop Making Sense, which Second Sight is releasing on Blu-ray later this year, and numerous other classic films, was hired to shoot it, and despite his ailing health he brings to the film its look, which seems like it was made by a better director than Joanou helmed the picture. A powerhouse cast, including Sean Penn, Gary Oldman, and Ed Harris, aided by Jordan Cronenweth's gorgeous cinematography, helps overcome some rather awkward plot holes in this gritty drama about the Italian-Irish mob relations in New York. Penn plays Terry Noonan, an old boy from the neighborhood who suddenly reappears after a long hiatus and lands an entry-level position with his best friend Jackie Flannery's Oldman Irish clan, run by Jackie's brother Frankie Harris. Although relations between the Irish and the Italians are strained, at best, Frankie has succeeded in crafting an alliance with the Italians that works considerably to his monetary favor. Adding to an already volatile mix is Terry's renewed relationship with Jackie and Frankie's sister, Robin Wright. The catch is that Noonan is an undercover cop from Boston who wants to clean up the kitchen but doesn't really want to harm his friends. With typically superior acting, Penn excellently portrays the psychological dilemma that is eating away at Noonan's insides. Fine acting, a good line-by-line script, overpowering a somewhat flawed storyline, and great camera work make up for the problems that young director Phil Joanou sometimes creates for himself. The ending, especially, an operatic ballet of slow-motion gory violence, is one of the most ridiculously unbelievable scenes of the year. Recommended, with the above reservations. Our pitman, Terry Noonan, Sean Penn, has a secret, and he is heading back to New York's Hell's Kitchen where he grew up for reasons he is unwilling to disclose. What he has done is be involved with a drugs deal where he apparently shot dead 2 of his contacts in front of his associate, then ran off, which could have prompted him to seek shelter in his old haunts, but earlier in the day he had been given the guns he was holding by one of the men, John Turturro, he shot, so it could well be there is a degree of subterfuge occurring. Whatever, once back home he immediately seeks out his childhood friend Jackie Flannery, Gary Oldman, who is delighted to see him and welcomes him with open arms. He is the brother of up-and-coming Irish-American mob boss Frankie, Ed Harris, and all 3 are ludicrously overacting in a crime drama that attempted to do for Irish-American gangsters what a whole bunch of other movies had done for the Italian-American mafia. Only these guys were supposed to be a lot wilder and out of control, so... You were offered what you imagine director Phil Joanou wanted to be an answer, or at least a companion piece, to Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America. However, 1990 was the year Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas was released, and that was the only mob movie anyone wanted to talk about back then, so State of Grace slipped under the radar somewhat, though it did amass a cult following by and by, mostly from those who responded to its sentimental treatment of thugs. But while it has that band of champions who will sing its praises and make sure to watch it while getting drunk on St. Patrick's Day, for everyone else the big deal was rather more difficult to discern. The trouble was everyone in the cast was attempting to outdo one another as far as authentic gritty performing went, which resulted in embarrassing scenes such as a group of them seeing who could yell "shut the fuck up" the loudest for what seems like a full minute, as if this passed for great thespianism. Oldman and Penn especially appeared to be in competition to outmacho the other, with a dollop of teary-eyed soul searching to deliver something approximating a rounded reading of their roles, but none of it rang true. Take the dreaded examples of cigarette acting. Many actors love a prop to enable them to adorn their performances with bits of business, but the humble coffin nail was employed to absurd lengths in State of Grace as the cast underlined their characters' lower-class roots by speaking through it held between their lips, or taking a drag in contemplative manner, or gesturing with it for emphasis, you name it. If this lot could find something to do with it to decorate an already right piece of acting, and once you noticed it was incredibly distracting. There was only one female role of any importance, as Robin Wright declined to puff away, but even she was skirting close to parody with combination accent and shoulders-out behavior, as if endeavoring to keep up with the big boys. You could just about excuse this if the story was able to carry the over-the-top cast, but the script had everyone going about their days as complete idiots, and only the way that they felt very sorry for themselves was supposed to make them sympathetic. Jackie in particular drinks enough alcohol to fell a horse but keeps jumping around, waving his arms about regardless as Terry fights with the affection he feels for the moron and his guilt at actually being prepared to sell him and his cohorts down the river. The overall effect, if you did not buy into the world of violence as somehow noble because of their European roots, was unbelievably tiresome, and there was over 2 hours of it to sprawl through patience testing limits of endurance for those not enamored of movie gangsters as it demanded you be. The point was how out of control these individuals were so that they were capable of anything, but it was the actors who were out of control as they chewed the scenery in a film Goodfellas rightly bettered in every respect. Music by Ennio Morricone. At its heart, State of Grace isn't really a new kind of film in the small-time gangster genre, but it is an example of one that follows the formula with well-oiled precision. What these movies all boil down to is loyalty, and how money and power can sometimes break the most powerful bonds of all family. State of Grace fits this model to a T, but with strong performances and gorgeous cinematography, Jordan Cronenweth, Blade Runner, this is a sleek and finely tuned drama that should please those who typically enjoy crime cinema stories from the inside. Sean Penn, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, U-Turn, stars as Terry Noonan, who returns to his roots in New York's Hell's Kitchen district, aka Clinton, after many years away. Unbeknownst to the guys in the neighborhood he grew up with, Terry has spent the last several years as a cop, and is now working undercover to crack down on the organized crime element that they are mostly composed of. He is welcomed by the fellas with open arms, quickly becoming one of them, although he is becoming increasingly conflicted between his duty as a police officer and wanting to protect his friends within the crime family from getting killed, whether by the cops, rival gangs, or within their own unit. His loyalties are fully in doubt when he rekindles an old relationship with the sister of the head of the gang, Kathleen Wright, the princess bride, who is fighting her own struggles with wanting to divorce herself from all that her brothers represent. It's hard to go wrong in the acting department when you have Penn, Oldman, True Romance, The Fifth Element, and Harris, Glengarry Glen Ross, running mates, in the cast, and in this respect, State of Grace definitely delivers some fine performances. Despite the fact that the siblings have almost no family resemblance, they do make you believe they are everything they are supposed to be within the context of the film. While Oldman gets the accolades for his energetic performance, it is really Penn's inner demons that provides the film with the right amount of conflict, always letting us be aware that fine lines are the difference between life and death, as well as right and wrong, out in the streets of New York. Is Penn doing the noble thing by taking down the criminals, or is he a rat bastard, disowning himself from the way of life and people who helped him along the way? It's the question that makes him sick to the pit of his stomach, and Penn shows it in his face with almost every scene. For those who like their films on the hard-boiled side, State of Grace arrests your attention with gritty confrontations and morally ambiguous situations. It's not The Godfather or Goodfellas, but Joanou, Final Analysis, Entropy, has crafted a nice-looking film for those who love those movies and just can't get enough. Movies are so engaging that you simply forget about everything else that's going on in your life. Only after 45 minutes did I notice that I was watching this movie. It captured my attention so firmly that I didn't think about anything else. State of Grace is one of the most underrated 90s neo-noir thrillers and undercover cop movies. It's just so fucking juicy that I cannot recommend it enough, especially to the fans of the genre. With each scene, you get more and more invested in the story and the characters. There's no fluff, melodrama, or boring exchanges. State of Grace is pure fucking muscle. And the cast, don't get me started on the cast. Young Sean Penn and Gary Oldman were playing off each other, giving incredible performances. Gary especially was a force of nature here, playing a realistic, unhinged criminal. You know the type I'm talking about, that guy that has trouble written all over him. Who lives fast and violently reacts to anything he comes into contact with. He would go on to reprise this role in another 90s classic, Leon. And I also have to mention Romeo is Bleeding just to top off the Gary Oldman 90s powerhouse performances list. The way he says fuck it here was so fucking sublime that keeps popping up in my head from time to time. This one short fucking sentence. Penn plays an undercover cop struggling to come to terms with his mission. A troubled man split right down the middle and disillusioned about the good fight. We also shouldn't forget about dependable Ed Harris, surprisingly dashing Robin Wright, and lovable John C. Reilly. The story takes place on the tough streets of New York. Hell's Kitchen, to be more precise. A place where the mob controls everything, and if you don't want to play by their rules, you will probably end up dead. A place where life is cheap, guys hard, and money easy. Abel Ferrara's movies like Bad Lieutenant, Fear City, and King of New York offer a similarly gritty and sleazy setting. So, despite the somewhat deceptive title State of Grace, this is an authentic and above all realistic thriller. I've watched it a couple of times over the years and each time it fucking blew me away. Meet Terry Noonan, a young cop who just accepted a dangerous assignment. He's to go back to his old neighborhood of Hell's Kitchen and reconnect with his old friends who are now all part of a mob. Irish mob who's now working with the Italians to establish total control of that part of New York. His main connection is Jackie, a loose cannon whose brother is now the head honcho making huge moves. However, it will soon become apparent that the assignment is going to get a lot messier than Terry initially thought. I want to hang on to that one word, messy, for just a brief moment. Mostly because this is how shit goes down in real life. Things are morally ambiguous, messy, and just plain old nasty. In this criminal underworld, you're forced to make choices between bad and worse options. All the while trying to stay alive. State of Grace does an incredible job of keeping things as realistic as possible. Moreover, a lot of the scenes actually happened in real life. Scriptwriter Dennis McIntyre drew inspiration from mobster testimonies detailing these intense situations. Unlike so many other movies about crime and mafia, State of Grace doesn't romanticize either the characters or the situations. However, you could argue that the main story is a bit stereotypical. I don't want to go into details, but I think you'll see what I mean when you watch the movie. And yet you'll hardly notice this because of all the other elements that were fucking top-notch. Just like in another cool 90s undercover cop movie, Deep Cover. Finally, State of Grace has one hell of an ending worthy of everything that came before it. State of Grace is a movie from 1990 that has enough power to last until 2008. It stars a very young Sean Penn, a very young Gary Oldman, a very young Robin Wright, before the pen, and an old-looking as usual Ed Harris. The plot centers around a young Irish hoodlum, Penn, who returns to Hell's Kitchen, New York after being away for years. When he returns, he meets back up with a family of Irish mobsters that he used to hang out with back in the old days. Namely Gary Oldman and his brother Ed Harris. It turns out that Harris has now become a boss of his own small-time gang and is running a section of the kitchen with the help of his loose cannon psychopath brother Oldman. Penn is now caught back into the old world of crime and violence that he tried to escape from all those years ago. I had seen this movie around 1994 and enjoyed it, but I had forgotten almost everything in it. So I thought I would give it another go to remember why I liked it so much. The second viewing was just as good. This movie packs an acting punch. The trio of Sean Penn, Gary Oldman and Ed Harris really slaps your face red. Oldman especially knows how to take a character and make it his own, and his Jackie Flannery has all the insanity that the characters in The Departed lacked. Of course, I decided to stand this movie toe-to-toe with The Departed, both being rather similar. The Departed is a good movie, but very flawed. If it had been directed by anyone else, it would have been a great movie, but I expect nothing but the best from Martin Scorsese, in which case, not so good. State of Grace, however, holds sway over what a good downtown Irish mob movie should be. The characters are ruthless and terrifying, and not so cartoony as they are in The Departed. Gary Oldman could hug you in 1 minute and then slit your throat in the next, without a reason. His long greasy hair and shit-eating grin really reminded me of the Joker in a way. The great thing about Oldman's character in this movie is that you love to hate him but kinda like him as well. He really holds the screen, and his de-evolution as a human being really makes you just wait for him to get his just desserts. Ed Harris plays a good newbie mob boss, trying to figure out the ropes but is still intimidated and scared by the Italian gangsters who actually run the town. He plays an icy creep very well. And then there is Sean Penn. This was his 15th movie, and really helped secure his transition into being considered a very serious actor. He is very strong in this movie, but is absolutely overshadowed by Oldman. Penn is an interesting good guy because he wants to reject his old life, but yet, this is all he knows. It's been done time and time again, I know, but it does seem to really work this time around. It doesn't feel as cliched as it easily could have. There is another twist in this movie that will be compared to The Departed, but I won't give that away. Also look for some great cameos by John Turturro and a little kid-looking John C. Reilly. At its heart, State of Grace isn't really a new kind of film in the small-time gangster genre, but it is an example of one that follows the formula with well-oiled precision. What these movies all boil down to is loyalty, and how money and power can sometimes break the most powerful bonds of all, family. State of Grace fits this model to a T, but with strong performances and gorgeous cinematography, Jordan Cronenweth, this is a sleek and finely tuned drama that should please those who typically enjoy crime cinema stories from the inside. Sean Penn stars as Terry Noonan, who returns to his roots in New York's Hell's Kitchen district, aka Clinton, after many years away. Unbeknownst to the guys in the neighborhood he grew up with, Terry has spent the last several years as a cop and is now working undercover to crack down on the organized crime element that they are mostly composed of. He is welcomed by the fellas with open arms, quickly becoming one of them, although he is becoming increasingly conflicted between his duty as a police officer and wanting to protect his friends within the crime family from getting killed, whether by the cops, rival gangs, or within their own unit. His loyalties are fully in doubt when he rekindles an old relationship with the sister of the head of the gang, Kathleen Wright, who is fighting her own struggles with wanting to divorce herself from all that her brothers represent. It's hard to go wrong in the acting department when you have Penn, Oldman, and Harris in the cast, and in this respect, State of Grace definitely delivers some fine performances. Despite the fact that the siblings have almost no family resemblance, they do make you believe they are everything they are supposed to be within the context of the film. While Oldman gets the accolades for his energetic performance, it is really Penn's inner demons that provide the film with the right amount of conflict, always letting us be aware that fine lines are the difference between life and death, as well as right and wrong, out in the streets of New York. Is Penn doing the noble thing by taking down the criminals, or is he a rat bastard, disowning himself from the way of life and people who helped him along the way? It's the question that makes him sick to the pit of his stomach, and Penn shows it in his face with almost every scene. For those who like their films on the hard-boiled side, State of Grace arrests your attention with gritty confrontations and morally ambiguous situations. It's not The Godfather or Goodfellas, but Joanou has crafted a nice-looking film for those who love those movies and just can't get enough. I read an article interview, I think with Gary Oldman, about the film State of Grace, way back in 1990 that grabbed my attention. Unfortunately, I forget which publication it was in, but it went on to describe how Gary Oldman and Sean Penn both agreed to make the picture after a lively telephone conversation. The article described at one point how Oldman teased Penn about Madonna during the early days of production on State of Grace. Oldman jokingly burst into a rendition of Like a Virgin, which was without question far from in good taste. For those who do not remember, Penn at the time had recently divorced from Madonna, in what was a very difficult period for the two of them. In 1989, Penn was charged with battery, but for some strange reason Madonna dropped the complaints and instead filed for divorce. Anyway, Penn, upon witnessing Oldman's impromptu performance, apparently took it quite well. This amazing story alone was enough for me to want to see how the chemistry between the two of them played out on screen. I was already a fan of Sean Penn's acting, seeing a number of his pictures, including Casualty of War, 1989, with Michael J. Fox, but I was more interested in seeing who was this remarkable Englishman Gary Oldman, the man who dared to mock Sean Penn. State of Grace is definitely a lost classic. It didn't initially make much of an impact on release, it was unfortunately overshadowed by the critically acclaimed Goodfellas, 1990, which was released almost at the same time. Nonetheless, it stands as one of my favorite films starring both Sean Penn and Gary Oldman, alongside Ed Harris, Robin Wright, and John C. Reilly. The film opens with the scene of Sean Penn against the Manhattan skyline with the Twin Towers in view, and we get a nagging suspicion, aided by Ennio Morricone opening Moody score, that something very underhanded is about to happen. Interestingly, New York, or more specifically Hell's Kitchen, as a gritty dirty place is cleverly directed by Joanou. In short, the film is about Terry Noonan, Penn, an undercover cop who infiltrates an Irish crime family losing its control over Hell's Kitchen. Noonan's return to his old neighbor, after a 10-year absence, and to the excitement of his former best friend, Oldman, now a henchman, sets in motion a dangerous tale of betrayal, redemption, and guilt. I think it's fair to say, an appraisal of the film over the years has lifted its status as a crime drama classic. My own personal glowing admiration for State of Grace is a little twisted, given the violent nature of the film, especially the climactic showdown during a crowded St. Patrick's Day parade. But having said that, its unexpected ending gives the film some much-needed credibility that any other film might have been tempted to insert a happier ending. The standout performance of the film, and it doesn't come as a surprise, is made by Gary Oldman as Jackie Flannery, a hot-headed gangster who believes his often ugly criminal behavior is justified to serve and protect his neighborhood and way of life. Having said that, you almost feel sorry for Jackie and his misplaced trust in his scheming crime boss older brothers, played by Ed Harris, motives for the family business. But we cannot forget and should give credit to Penn for his almost polar opposite performance to Oldman, as the ex-con turned cop, who is truly torn between his loyalty towards Jackie and his own sense of place in this world. A great deal of what happens to Noonan is also played out as he is drawn back to his former lover, played by Robin Wright, which only adds to his confusion about what is right and wrong. State of Grace may never rise to the accolades of films like Goodfellas, 1990, The Usual Suspect, 1995, Gangs of New York, 2002, or The Departed, 2006, but its strong accomplished performances, in particularly from Gary Oldman and its haunting musical score from one of cinema's great composers Ennio Morricone, are reason enough for me to believe it might one day truly endure as a genre classic. ALS in Pakistan met Schromlich Gonderschaft Films zo State of Grace or Zeker in Zitten. Misdadig eigenlijk dat dik gangsterdrama van Phil Joanou niet de just woorderen krieg en ondertussen onder een flink log stof begraven ligt. Dit Pike Porter at de years Goodfellas no men is misgien net IETST hu gegripen maar iedere filmliefhebber moet des DVD en zin collectie proppen. Tid voor een opwardering. Grofgerlige beelden van een parade, opgeluisterd door de betaveren muziek van Ennio Morricone, begeleiden de openingscredits. Dit is de optocht van St. Patrick's Day, de nationaal feestdag van iedereen die eiers bloed door de ouderen volstromen en giftmeteen de achtergrond weer waren State of Grace zich afspeelt. Hell's Kitchen vormt het decor van dit verhaal over verad, loyaliteit en eer. Dies Wijgen New York, waar jes avons better niet de handjut lat, stopbekend als een broodnis van misdaad. Vooral eiers Amerikaans ben slaan hier hun tentacles uit. Diet dies bert afkomstig Terry Noonan, Sean Penn, laat zich na jaren van afwezigheid nageen zien. Zinad vren Jackie Flannery, Gary Oldman, ontvangt hem met open armen en introduceert hem bij het misdaad syndicate van zijn broer Frankie, Ed Harris. Noonan laat zich in met devoile zochtjes van de familie en ligt op een crimineel carrière aft Stevenen. Beide broers weten echter niet dat dies laatste double agenda heeft. Dit is de aanzet tot een mezelpen verhaal dat de nadruk legt op het pot gemeenschap tussen de loyaliteit en werkethiek van Noonan. Dies infiltreert in de band OMZT ontmantelen maar krijgt twijfels over zijn opdracht omdat hij zich schuldig voelt tegenover zijn kamerad. Tussendoor betast Terry nageens juglief Kathleen, Robin Wright Penn, de Zeus van de Broers, en raakt zo versterkt in intriges worven zelfs de scenaristen van los niet eens wisten dat ze überhaupt bestanden. De stil van State of Grace is bijzonder realistisch. Verwacht dus geen ubercool gangster zoals Tarantino ze presentert. Beide broers zijn eerder nitwits die hoogrop willen maar zichzelf uit pure domigheid in de voet schieten. Jackie gedreigt zich als een olifant op speed en vertrappelt iedereen die hem in de weg loopt, terwijl Frankie zich kleedt en gedreigt als een gangster maar eigenlijk een onbestofbaren pummel is die nageens dienstoot als persoonlijk voetweg van de Italiaans gangster Borelli. De enige met een beach harzes ligt Kathleen die dan afstand neemt van dies culture. De vertolking van Sean Penn net zo strak als de string rond de billen van Megan Fox. Maar het hoogst schavet is voor Gary Oldman die zich net zo in zijn SAS volt als Lionel Messi op een groenveld en zich met het grits gemaakt tussen zijn medespelers lavert uiteindelijk met een strak shot het pleit te beslechten. Karakterkop Ed Harris blijft stoisens over een tussen dies twee jonge leeuwen. De opgekropt wordt en frustraties van de protagonisten komt uiteindelijk tot ontploffing tijdens een werkelijk modig gefilmde shootout tijdens St. Patrick's Day. Eentje die net zo goed van Michael Mann kon komen. Formidabele film met nageens fantastisch muziek op de achtergrond. Waar walked u nog op? What was it like working with Ennio Morricone? I had always dreamed of working with Ennio Morricone. And after the U2 guys were not able to do the score for State of Grace, I went to Orion and asked them if they'd be open to it, knowing it would be a long shot, and they agreed that I could go after him. We approached his reps and he agreed to have me come over to Rome and show him the movie in his screening room. I had only done Rattle and Hum and 3 O'Clock High, so to this day, I'm not really sure why he agreed, but I was thrilled that he did. My editor and I took the movie to his studio in Rome. We both walked in straight off the flight, with the film cans under our arms, and Ennio was waiting for us in the lobby with his translator. He took one look at me and said, "You can take the film upstairs to the projectionist, I will wait for the director to arrive." Apparently he thought I was a PA. I will admit I didn't look much like a director at the time, as you can see from photos from that era. Anyway, I explained that I was actually the director, and Ennio's face just dropped. Clearly no one had told him how old I was, which was 28. I think he immediately regretted he'd agreed to see a film made by a punk kid. But then he pulled himself together, in a very gracious way, and we went ahead and started the screening. The thing was, I had temp dubbed the film with a lot of U2 music and other tracks, Peter Gabriel, Mark Knopfler etc., that were modern sounding. As we started up the film and the music dropped in, Ennio turned to me, very distressed and, through the translator, asked why there was this modern music on the film. It ended up that he preferred to screen early cuts without any music on the track, but no one had told us this. And not only that, he's clearly a classical composer and couldn't understand why I would come to him if I wanted a modern rock and roll soundtrack. So here we are, sitting through a 2.5-hour version of the film, with a ton of music in it, and he's miserable. I asked if he wanted to stop, but he just kind of gestured to continue. I was completely mortified as I could tell the screening was a disaster. He even stopped asking questions for translation on certain scenes. Once the film was over, he thanked us very nicely and said he would get back to us. At this point, I just knew it wasn't going to happen. We returned to the hotel, so disappointed. And then we got a call from his producer, and Ennio invited us to dinner at his favorite restaurant that night. We couldn't really figure out why he'd do that, but of course we went. We had a very nice dinner, but he didn't mention the movie at all, not until the very end of the meal. And then he stood up and made a toast to State of Grace. May we make beautiful music for your film. My jaw just dropped. At first I was just kind of confused, and I said, "You want to do the movie?" He smiled ear to ear, and without translation said, "But of course." I loved it. Now here I was, the entire night, thinking he was just being polite, taking us out for a nice try-dinner. But he ended up really wanting to do it. He's a very mischievous man, it turns out. He was having a lot of fun watching us wonder what in the hell was going on all dinner long. We all had a good laugh about that. We discussed the movie late into the night. Lots of toasts and lots of laughs. I came back about a month later and went to his home, where he played me the main themes on his grand piano in his huge, marbled palazzo. It was amazing. He played me 6 different themes, and asked me which 2 or 3 I liked. They were all great, but I thought it might be interesting if we combined some and worked further on others. I could tell he was kind of taken aback, thinking I was just going to pick, as he had suggested, the ones I liked. But then the shock drained from his face, he smiled, and I could tell he started respecting me that day because I had a real idea of what I wanted, not just for picking themes, but for creating music that I really felt fit the film. He loved that I wanted to get into it and work with him on the mood and tone of the music. I know that sounds tremendously arrogant. What on earth was I doing collaborating with Ennio Morricone? But when you live with a film for more than a year, you really get to know its personality, its character, and in an odd way, you know what it would sound like and what it wouldn't. Anyway, we worked for a couple of weeks together and had a fantastic time. He's a ton of fun and very, very funny. Very passionate, as you could imagine. And I'm a pretty enthusiastic guy, so we really got along. After that I went away and he wrote the score. When I returned, we went into his studio and he played me tracks. We did some more work together and then we scored. He brought in his incredible orchestra and there I was in Rome, my film running on the big screen, Ennio Morricone conducting. The first cue was the opening credits. He tapped his baton, the film ran, and up came that lonely oboe. I'll admit, tears came to my eyes. I was working with a living, breathing master, and I felt this work was Ennio at the top of his game. It is an experience I will never, ever forget. One of your most underrated talents is getting career-best-worthy performances from very intense actors like Gary Oldman, Sean Penn, Ed Harris, and Alec Baldwin, actors whose reputations and fieriness might scare some filmmakers. To what do you attribute that? At the time, I think they thought I was as crazy as they were. I love what I do so much that I'm willing to go as far as it takes in an attempt to get it right. I am so ready and open for any kind of questions or ideas or concerns. The actors can be "This is awesome. Let's do it," or "I fucking hate this." I don't want to do it. It can be "I want to do another take," or "I don't want to do another take." I'm open to all of it. I think for a lot of directors, directing is about control, and the mistake that they make with really strong actors is that they try to put handcuffs on them, which just makes them resist. They're not going to deliver their best work that way. But they will give you amazing things if you open the door to the barn and say, "Go ahead, run wild." And then, I'm even willing to say, "No. I meant go wild." Is that wild? I want to see you fucking go. Next minute the actors are ripping chairs apart and throwing them through windows. They're going crazy. And that's what I wanted, and got on State of Grace, and the same was true of Alec in Heaven's Prisoners. These guys love that sense that you're totally there to support them and let them do their thing, that you're there to push them, but that you know when to shut up when they just want to do their thing without being pushed. I think that's what they respond to with me. In fact, the harder and tougher actors come, the easier it is for me to get along with them. I have always thought that the reputation that those actors you mentioned, and others, for being tough is simply their passion and commitment to their craft and to the project. That scares a lot of people because they feel that the whole thing is going to turn into anarchy. But these actors, and you too, taught me to embrace the anarchy. When Bono said fuck the film when we were shooting Rattle and Hum, it was the right idea. It just wasn't technically doable because of the way we had staged the show. But spontaneity and really going for it is always the right idea. That rock and roll attitude of we know what we are going to do but let's see what else could happen is antithetical to a lot of people when it comes to the filmmaking process. On State of Grace, were the relationships between the characters duplicated between the actors when they were off-screen too? With Sean and Robin, absolutely. They met and fell in love during the movie and it was a very tumultuous thing. It was so funny because often it would mimic whatever the scenes were. So on the days when they were supposed to be in love and charming with each other in the movie, they'd often be the same off-screen, and on the days when we were shooting Robin finding out Sean was a cop, they'd be arguing off-screen too, yelling in the hallway about God knows what. It was very intense, but then I'd interrupt and say let's go, and they'd come roaring into the scene and it would be fantastic. Gary would go home in his clothes from the movie and come back the next day wearing them. He was sleeping, eating, and breathing that character. About a decade after the movie came out, I was in a dentist's office reading an interview with Ed Harris, and he was asked what the hardest character for him was to shake off after the movie was over. He answered my character in State of Grace. I had no idea. He went on to talk about how into their roles all the actors got on the film. It was interesting because what you usually do on movies to save money is that if you have someone like Ed Harris for 4 weeks of a 12-week shoot, you'll do all his scenes first and then he'll leave. But on State of Grace, everybody stayed the entire time. We shot the film for real in practical locations, and on the streets of New York, and the cast just ate it up. It was total mayhem and a hell of a lot of fun. Best summer of my career by far. Were you actually scared at any time? Yeah, I was scared quite a few times, but I would never let it show. A chair would go through a window or someone cut themselves or broke their fingers because someone had twisted it in a fight scene. Sean accidentally broke a guy's nose. People were flipping out. I just went with it. Fake guns and knives were flying around. Ed Harris was trying to scare John C. Reilly by pulling out a real knife when he was supposed to be stabbing him with a rubber fake one. John got upset. It wasn't safe and he thought Ed was really going to stab him, which was the idea in the scene. Of course I called cut once I saw the real knife, and I kept taking it away from Ed, but then he would come up with another knife. At one point he had a meat cleaver, which to this day I have no idea where he got. I'd say now Ed, we can't use a meat cleaver on John. I would very calmly take the meat cleaver from him and give him back the rubber knife. Inside I was thinking, oh, God, he's gonna chop John C. Reilly's head off, but on the outside I had to look like it was no big deal. In the end, the scene where Ed slashes John's throat turned out great because there was so much tension in the air that night. What films did you look at when preparing the end shootout? I was inspired by The Wild Bunch, 1969, the crosscut ending of The Godfather, 1972, and the staircase scene from Brian De Palma's The Untouchables, 1987. I really studied those scenes. I even brought footage of The Wild Bunch to the set so the effects guys could see how I wanted the blood to fly. It's like a Western. It's the showdown you've been waiting for between these two guys. The minute Sean and Ed meet in the film, you knew it was coming. A lot of it is how great the actors were more than anything else. You just want to see them go at it. John Ford said 90% of directing is casting. I think he's right. Sean Penn asked to bring David Rabe on to do rewrites. What did you think his rewrites brought to the movie? David made a tremendous contribution to that movie. It really was unfair that he didn't receive a screen credit, but it is very difficult to rewrite an original screenplay and get credit. You really have to reinvent the script in order to get credit. He rewrote a lot of the dialogue, including Sean's State of Grace monologue. He created new scenes as well. While the structure of the movie was basically already there, David influenced every single aspect of the movie. The original writer, Dennis McIntyre, was a great writer and completely deserves the credit he received, but I think they both contributed greatly to the movie and David should have been up there too. David and I had a great relationship. I would go to his home in Mount Kisco and work with him on the script, and just to be sitting in the room with such an incredibly accomplished playwright was unbelievable. It was another of those "how did I get here" situations. And what makes it even stranger is, cut to 25 years later, and his daughter Lily Rabe is one of the stars of my new film, The Veil. How did you get involved with directing the American version of the TV documentary series, Up? When I had completed Rattle and Hum, Michael Apted, the director of the British Up series, called me up and asked me to come in for a meeting. I had no idea that he was about to offer me the chance to do Age 7 in America. Naturally, I jumped at the opportunity. I had seen all the original episodes and was a huge fan of the series. It's brilliant. I couldn't believe I was getting the shot to do the American version. It was so amazing going around the country and really getting to know the kids from all these different backgrounds. Each kid had such a unique perspective on the world, and you could immediately see how their educational opportunities, financial situation, home life, and geographical location had all contributed so dramatically to who they were. I so loved interviewing the kids and filming their world, just from a life experience perspective. It was a one-of-a-kind thing. The kids were so open and honest and trusting with me. In what ways did the series develop your filmmaking skills? From a filmmaking perspective, what I loved the most was that documentary filmmaking is so pure. You're not trying to impose a point of view on the filmmaking in any way, which is just the opposite of feature filmmaking. It's your job to try and capture reality as closely and honestly as you can, even though that's impossible, as once you turn on a camera and point it at someone, it changes the reality. You have to keep your eyes and ears open at all times, looking for those moments that represent the people and the situations you're documenting. And what was so different was that in all my narrative work, I tried to be as controlled as possible. But in a documentary, you just have to let go of that and be open to whatever is happening and then find the story that comes to you. Going through that process really opened me up as a filmmaker, and I found myself less rigid in my feature filmmaking after Age 7 in America. How were you personally affected when you returned 7 years later to document the kids in 14 Up in America? I was blown away by how the kids had developed. Each of them had grown and changed so much, but at the same time, they were still the very essence of who they were at Age 7. This had also been the case in the original British show. Mostly, who they were now were just more enhanced and complicated versions of their 7-year-old selves. I was able to bond with them as people much more deeply once they were 14, and some of those relationships last to this day. Why did you not direct Age 21 in America? Unfortunately, when it came along, I was on Gridiron Gang and they didn't want to wait 6 months for me to be available. They had their reasons, I suppose. So they went with another director, Christopher Dylan Quinn. I'll admit I was very, very disappointed not to be able to do it. I felt like we had all made a commitment to see the project through together, like the BBC had done with Michael Apted, but it turned out it was not to be. The first show won a Peabody and the second one was a huge success. So it was really weird. I know a lot of the kids were disappointed I wasn't there too. 21 Up in America was never released in the US, and in the end the whole thing ground to a halt as they didn't even go back for the most important year, Age 28, which should have come out in 2013. It amazes me because 28 Up was the installment that became extremely famous for Michael, and it seems to me that they would have jumped at the chance to at least get the American version to 28. But they chose not to, and to this day, I don't know why. What were the main problems you had making Final Analysis? I had a great relationship on the film with the producer Chuck Roven, who now does all the Batman movies. He's a great producer. Richard Gere was a co-producer on the movie. The movie was the second most expensive movie of the year for Warner's, after Batman Returns, 1992. Richard was coming off Pretty Woman, 1990, and couldn't have been any bigger. Although Richard and I got along, we just saw two different films. That was the first time in my career where I ran up against somebody who didn't share my vision for what we were trying to do. It wasn't like north/south. It was more a matter of tone. We didn't battle during the shoot, but in post-production there were a lot of arguments about how the edit should go, and it just made for an unpleasant experience for both of us. We were both unhappy. It was a disappointing experience because we had a pretty good script and we had something that could have been better than it turned out. Several times during pre-production I had asked to be released from the film because it was Richard's project and I didn't want to stand in the way. He had seen State of Grace and brought me on board. But Warner's wouldn't let me off it, so I ended up trying to make the best of it. I liked the script and I wanted to make a darker Billy Wilder/Hitchcockian thriller, kind of Double Indemnity, 1944, meets Vertigo, 1958, whereas I think he wanted to make more of a brooding romance piece, particularly after the success of Pretty Woman. So you have scenes in the movie with him and Kim Basinger that are romantic and kind of fluffy, when I wanted to do something more sinister and noir. You can see a clash of tones in the movie in that in some places the film can't decide what it wants to be. I think it's 80% there, but the other 20% fights itself. That's where you see the more romantic stuff like the love scene on the stairwell in the lighthouse. I don't know what that scene was about. I was shooting it and saying to everybody, "What is this? I don't get it," which is obviously not good. And of course that was the image that they used for the poster. I had been so supported by everybody on my previous films and been allowed to be very open and really guide the film in a way I saw fit. But in this case I had to go with the flow and it didn't sit well with me at all. In all fairness, I was immature and not ready for the clash of titans that was fighting with big players like Warner Brothers and a major star who was also co-producing and had all the real power. I had been protected at Universal by Sid Sheinberg and by Steven on my first film. I had been off with a band that trusted and believed in me, and then I was protected and supported at Orion on State of Grace. Then the real world of Hollywood came down and slapped me around pretty good. Frankly, I didn't have the emotional toughness to take those hits and get back on my feet. I was pretty upset about it all, and that didn't help the movie either. I'm just as guilty of it not working as anybody. Is taking a genre and putting your own spin on it something you particularly enjoy? Absolutely. What was disappointing about something like Final Analysis was that I wanted to take old school noir and apply it to the 90s. To some degree Basic Instinct, 1992, did exactly that, but that film was way more sexually driven. I wanted Richard's character to be a complete anti-hero. Harry's this shrink who sleeps with his patient's sister. It's completely unethical. It's like Double Indemnity, 1944, and he gets himself into a dangerous situation and almost gets himself sent to jail for murder. It's a story of hubris. But in the end what I wanted to do didn't get to play itself out because it made Richard's character unlikable. The irony is that whenever Richard plays flawed or villainous characters like in American Gigolo, 1980, Internal Affairs, 1990, or Arbitrage, 2012, he's fantastic. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do it with him. I thought we were making a movie like Internal Affairs, but with a shrink, and I was excited to work with him. The idea was that Richard's character was going to get what's coming to him. But that's not the movie we made. Instead, we have a character trying hard to do the right thing, even though he's not. Why was Gary Oldman cut out of the film? He did 5 days on the movie and did several scenes with Richard. He played a mental patient client of Gears. He was so fantastic in the movie that when we showed the film to an audience they wanted to see a lot more of him. It threw the whole movie out of whack. His role was just meant to be an offbeat supporting character, but audiences were pissed off that he drifted out of the story and they didn't find out what happened to him. Gary had exploded and everybody wanted to see more of him on screen, so I had to say to him, "Gary, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to cut you out of the movie. You're too good." He and I actually had a good laugh about it. I wish I had kept those scenes because they were great. He was so funny in them. He played a character who thought he was from another planet. You can only imagine what he did with that. Was it fun to reunite with Gary again on Dead End for Delilah, the opening episode you directed for the TV anthology series Fallen Angels? Yes, I did that before Heaven's Prisoners. We shot it in 5 days. Scott Frank did a great job on the script. Sidney Pollack's company produced it. It was a lot of fun. Gary is really strong in that. We had a really great collaboration going at the time. It's not on DVD, but you can see it on my website. By comparison, you were asked to direct the last episode of Oliver Stone's TV series, Wild Palms. How was that experience? Did you feel pressure having the responsibility of directing the finale? Wild Palms was indeed a wild one. I was living in New York at the time and I got a call out of the blue, as it always seems to happen, from Oliver Stone. He told me about the show and asked if I'd do the final episode. They'd already started shooting the series, but they hadn't landed on who they wanted for the climax. I read the script, but it made no sense to me at all, so I asked them to send me the other episodes so I'd know what the hell was going on. Once I saw them, I understood them a little better. It was such an insane story, but it was fun to do. The cast was fantastic, but just getting to work with Angie Dickinson was a dream come true. People don't realize the incredible career she had, starring opposite Brando, working with John Wayne and Howard Hawks, Don Siegel, Arthur Penn, Sidney Pollack, Brian De Palma, not to mention her iconic work in television. She was fantastic. In the end, I didn't feel a lot of pressure being the director on the last episode because the whole thing was so crazy I had no idea if it would work. But it was really well received and I was glad I did it. Does doing TV episodes like these sharpen up your storytelling instincts? Oh, no question. It keeps you fresh and to the point because you have to keep it tight and keep it moving. That's a really, really useful skill. State of Grace, 1990, is a dark, violent, and emotionally complicated crime drama directed by Joanou, featuring an outstanding cast led by Sean Penn, Gary Oldman, Ed Harris, and Robin Wright. Running for approximately 134 minutes, the film takes viewers into the dangerous world of Irish-American organized crime in New York's Hell's Kitchen. Although the movie was released around the same time as Goodfellas and was overshadowed by that much more famous gangster classic, State of Grace has developed a strong reputation among viewers who appreciate serious, atmospheric, and character-driven crime films. The story follows Terry Noonan, played by Sean Penn, a man who returns to his old neighborhood after being away for many years. Terry is welcomed back by his childhood friend Jackie Flannery, portrayed by Gary Oldman. At first, their reunion feels like two old friends reconnecting after a long separation. But Terry's return is not as innocent as it appears. He has a secret mission, and the deeper he becomes involved with his former friends, the harder it becomes for him to separate his past from his present. Terry's old neighborhood has changed dramatically. The streets that once represented home, friendship, and childhood memories are now dominated by crime, violence, money, and fear. The neighborhood itself is under pressure from changing demographics and rising property values. This gives the movie an interesting background because the gangsters are not simply fighting rival criminals, they are also fighting against a world that is slowly pushing them out. Roger Ebert noted that the film's gangster characters operate in Hell's Kitchen while even rising rents threaten their place in the neighborhood. At the center of Terry's emotional conflict is his friendship with Jackie. Their relationship is one of the strongest elements of the film. Jackie is reckless, unpredictable, and extremely violent, but he is also deeply loyal to the people he considers family. Gary Oldman gives the character an explosive personality that makes Jackie difficult to understand but impossible to ignore. Oldman's performance is arguably the most memorable part of the movie. Jackie can laugh one moment and become terrifying the next. He is the kind of person who does not carefully calculate every decision. Instead, he reacts through emotion, anger, loyalty, and paranoia. This makes him extremely dangerous because even the people closest to him cannot always predict what he will do. Roger Ebert particularly praised Gary Oldman's performance, describing it as the film's best element and emphasizing how much more instinctive and unpredictable Jackie's character is compared with Terry's more conflicted personality. Sean Penn's Terry is almost the opposite of Jackie. He is quieter and more controlled, but internally he is struggling constantly. Terry has returned to a world that helped shape him, yet he is no longer the same person. He has seen another life and understands that the criminal lifestyle of his youth has consequences. The tragedy of Terry's situation is that his professional mission requires him to betray people he once loved. He is trying to bring criminals down from the inside, but every step forward places his old relationships in greater danger. His friendship with Jackie makes the situation especially painful because Terry knows that eventually he may have to choose between his duty and the people who once considered him family. Sean Penn handles this internal conflict with a restrained performance. Instead of constantly explaining Terry's emotions, the movie allows his expressions, silences and reactions to communicate much of what he is feeling. The Los Angeles Times also praised Penn's performance and described Terry as a complex character caught between his new life and his old loyalties. Then there is Frankie Flannery, played by Ed Harris. Frankie is a completely different type of gangster. Unlike Jackie, who is emotional and impulsive, Frankie is colder and more controlled. He understands power and money, and he knows that violence can be useful when properly directed. Ed Harris gives Frankie an intimidating presence without needing to exaggerate the character. He often appears calm, but that calmness makes him even more frightening. You get the impression that Frankie does not need to shout or threaten people constantly because everyone around him already understands what he is capable of doing. The relationship between Frankie and Jackie is also fascinating. They are brothers, but they represent two different sides of the criminal world. Jackie is emotional and unstable, while Frankie is calculating and business-minded. Their relationship shows how crime can become part of a family structure where loyalty and violence exist side by side. Robin Wright plays Kathleen Flannery, Jackie's sister and Terry's former love interest. Kathleen represents another possible life for Terry. She has moved away from the neighborhood and attempted to distance herself from the violence surrounding her family. Her return to Terry's life makes his situation even more complicated. The romantic element is important because Terry is not simply deciding whether to betray a gang. He is also confronting the life he might have had if he had never left. Kathleen reminds him of the person he used to be and the possibility of becoming someone different. The movie's themes are therefore much deeper than a simple cops versus gangsters story. State of Grace is about loyalty, betrayal, identity, friendship, family, and the difficulty of escaping one's past. One of the film's strongest ideas is that people can leave a neighborhood, but they cannot necessarily leave their memories behind. Terry has spent years away, yet when he returns, old relationships immediately begin pulling him back. His childhood identity is still there beneath the person he has become. Terry's job requires deception. Jackie believes Terry is genuinely returning to his old life. The audience understands that Terry is hiding something, which creates tension in almost every scene between the two men. Even ordinary conversations become dangerous because the viewer knows that Terry's secret could destroy everything. This is where the movie becomes more interesting than a standard gangster thriller. The violence matters, but the emotional consequences matter even more. The atmosphere of State of Grace is another major strength. The movie presents New York as a rough, grimy, and threatening environment. The streets feel crowded and dangerous, while bars, apartments, and back rooms become places where friendships can suddenly turn into confrontations. The cinematography by Jordan Cronenweth contributes significantly to this atmosphere. The movie has a dark visual identity that fits its story. It does not make the criminal world look glamorous. Instead, there is a sense of decay and exhaustion surrounding the characters. The visual style becomes especially effective during the movie's violent sequences. The film does not treat violence as something clean or heroic. When characters are killed, betrayed, or injured, the consequences feel serious. The score by legendary composer Ennio Morricone is another important component. His music gives the movie an emotional and almost tragic quality. Rather than simply making the action exciting, the score often makes scenes feel like inevitable tragedies. This combination of cinematography and music creates an atmosphere that stays with the viewer. Even when the story slows down, the movie continues to feel tense because the environment itself seems dangerous. The film's violence is intense, but it is not violence for entertainment alone. Violence is connected to the characters' personalities and choices. Jackie, especially, demonstrates how quickly criminal behavior can move from intimidation to murder. One of the movie's most effective ideas is the contrast between loyalty and morality. The characters constantly talk and behave as though loyalty is the most important virtue. But their version of loyalty can involve protecting criminals, accepting murder, and betraying innocent people. Terry is technically doing the right thing by working against criminals, but emotionally he is betraying people who once mattered to him. Jackie may be doing terrible things, but from his perspective, loyalty to his friends and family is sacred. This moral ambiguity is one reason the movie still works decades after its release. The characters are not simply divided into heroes and villains. They are people shaped by their environment, their relationships, and their own weaknesses. The supporting cast also deserves recognition. John Turturro contributes another memorable performance, while veteran actor Burgess Meredith brings a different emotional quality to the film. The ensemble helps make the neighborhood feel like a real community rather than merely a backdrop for the main characters. Its biggest weakness is its story structure. The beginning is particularly strong because it focuses on character relationships and the atmosphere of the neighborhood. As the plot becomes more complicated, some developments begin to feel familiar. Roger Ebert made a similar criticism, arguing that the movie becomes less original as its plot grows more complicated and begins to rely on familiar gangster story elements. The movie's 134-minute runtime can also feel lengthy. There are scenes that could have been shortened without losing the central story. Some viewers may find the pacing slow compared with more aggressively edited modern crime thrillers. But the slower moments also allow the characters to breathe. The movie is interested in relationships and atmosphere, so it does not rush from one action scene to another. Another challenge for State of Grace is its unfortunate historical timing. It was released in 1990, around the same period as Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas. Because both films explore organized crime and the lives of gangsters, comparisons were inevitable. Critics and audiences naturally measured State of Grace against one of the most celebrated crime films ever made. Ebert specifically noted that Goodfellas overshadowed the film and made comparison difficult. Goodfellas is more energetic and expansive, while State of Grace is darker and more intimate. Goodfellas often examines the lifestyle of organized crime from the inside, while State of Grace focuses heavily on betrayal, friendship, and the emotional consequences of returning home. The movie also feels different because of Gary Oldman's Jackie. Jackie is not simply another gangster character. He is volatile, childish, frightening, and strangely vulnerable at the same time. His behavior gives the movie an unpredictable energy. There are moments when Jackie is almost funny, followed immediately by moments when he becomes genuinely terrifying. That emotional instability makes him one of the most interesting characters in the movie. Ed Harris provides the opposite energy. Frankie is controlled where Jackie is chaotic. His presence creates a feeling that violence can be organized just as easily as it can be spontaneous. Sean Penn sits between these two personalities. Terry understands Jackie, but he also understands Frankie. He belongs to the neighborhood emotionally, but he no longer belongs to its criminal world. The movie's title, State of Grace, can also be interpreted in an ironic way. The characters are surrounded by violence, betrayal, and corruption, yet they continue searching for friendship, family, and redemption. Terry especially appears to be searching for some kind of moral escape. But the film repeatedly suggests that redemption may come too late. The final portion of the movie brings the accumulated tension to a violent conclusion. Without giving away every detail, the story eventually forces the characters to confront the consequences of the decisions they have made. The ending is bloody and tragic, and it fits the film's overall atmosphere. The climax is one of the movie's most memorable sequences, although some critics have argued that it becomes overly familiar or excessive. Time Out, however, praised the film's visual impact and highlighted the power of its performances and its violent finale. For viewers who enjoy gangster movies, State of Grace offers plenty to appreciate. It has a strong cast, excellent performances, atmospheric cinematography, a powerful score, and a story built around complicated relationships. For viewers expecting non-stop action, the movie may feel slower than expected. It is much more interested in character psychology than simply showing criminal activity. The film is also quite violent and contains strong language and mature themes, so it is definitely aimed at an adult audience. One of the most impressive aspects of the movie is how believable the friendship between Terry and Jackie feels. Despite everything that happens, there is a sense that these two men genuinely shared a childhood and genuinely care about each other. That makes the eventual conflict much more painful. Without that friendship, the story would simply be another undercover crime thriller. With it, the movie becomes a tragedy about two people who grew up together but chose completely different paths. The film also explores how neighborhoods change. The old Hell's Kitchen world is disappearing, and the criminals who once controlled parts of it are becoming increasingly irrelevant. They are fighting to preserve something that is already disappearing. This gives the story a sense of melancholy. These characters are not only fighting each other, they are fighting time. State of Grace, 1990, is a dark, gritty, and emotionally powerful crime drama that explores friendship, loyalty, betrayal, family, and the difficult choices people make when their past collides with the present. Directed by Joanou, the film features a remarkable cast led by Penn, Gary Oldman, Ed Harris, Robin Wright, and John Turturro. Although the movie did not receive the same level of attention as some other gangster films of its era, it has developed a strong reputation as an underrated crime classic. The story follows Terry Noonan, played by Penn, who returns to his old neighborhood in Hell's Kitchen, New York, after being away for several years. At first, his return seems like a simple reunion with old friends, but Terry is hiding a major secret. He is actually working undercover for the police and has returned to investigate the criminal organization operating in his old neighborhood. Terry soon reconnects with his childhood friend Jackie Flannery, played by Gary Oldman. Jackie has become deeply involved in organized crime and works with his older brother Frankie Flannery, portrayed by Ed Harris. Frankie is a powerful and respected figure within the neighborhood's criminal world. Terry's mission is to gather evidence against the gang, but his job becomes increasingly complicated because these criminals are not strangers to him. They are people he grew up with. This is where the movie becomes much more interesting than a typical gangster story. Terry is not simply investigating criminals, he is investigating people he once considered family. Jackie is his old friend, Kathleen is someone he once loved, and Frankie represents the powerful figure controlling the neighborhood. Terry knows what these people have become, but he also remembers who they were before crime took over their lives. Penn gives a restrained and convincing performance as Terry. His character is quiet and observant, and much of his emotion is communicated through his facial expressions rather than long speeches. Terry constantly looks like a man carrying a heavy secret. He knows that exposing the gang could destroy his old friends, but refusing to do his job could also put innocent people in danger. Gary Oldman's performance as Jackie is arguably the most memorable part of the film. Jackie is unpredictable, emotional, violent, and sometimes almost frighteningly energetic. Oldman brings a mixture of anger, insecurity, loyalty, and desperation to the character. Jackie can be charming one moment and terrifying the next. His friendship with Terry gives the character an emotional dimension that goes beyond simply being a gangster. Ed Harris is equally impressive as Frankie Flannery. Unlike Jackie, Frankie is controlled and calculating. He does not need to constantly shout or threaten people to make his presence felt. His calm personality makes him even more intimidating. Harris gives Frankie the feeling of a man who understands power and knows exactly how to use it. One of the strongest elements of State of Grace is its atmosphere. The film presents Hell's Kitchen as a rough, dangerous neighborhood filled with bars, criminal organizations, old friendships, and changing communities. The streets and buildings create a realistic feeling that makes the story feel grounded rather than overly glamorous. The cinematography also deserves praise. The dark streets, nighttime scenes, shadows, and muted visual style give the movie a strong neo-noir atmosphere. The city does not look beautiful in a traditional Hollywood sense. Instead, it feels cold, dangerous, and lived in. The visual style perfectly matches the story's themes of secrecy and betrayal. Another major strength is the film's music. The score by Ennio Morricone adds emotional weight to many scenes. His music helps create a feeling of sadness, danger, and inevitability. As the story moves toward its final act, the score becomes especially effective and helps increase the tension. The central theme of the movie is loyalty. Terry has to decide where his loyalty truly belongs. Is he loyal to the police? To his childhood friends? To his old neighborhood? Or to the people he once loved? The movie does not provide simple answers. Instead, it shows how complicated loyalty can become when people have changed. Friendship is another major theme. Terry and Jackie share a history that goes back many years, and their relationship is one of the emotional foundations of the film. Jackie trusts Terry because of their childhood connection, but Terry is hiding the truth from him. This creates a painful tension because the audience understands that their friendship cannot survive forever if Terry continues with his mission. The movie also explores the idea of betrayal. Almost every important character is hiding something. Terry hides his real identity, criminals hide their activities, and relationships are built on incomplete truths. As the story progresses, trust becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. The film is not perfect. Its pacing can feel slow in certain sections, particularly for viewers who expect constant action. Some parts of the story follow familiar gangster movie conventions, and the plot occasionally feels less original than its characters and atmosphere. However, these weaknesses are outweighed by the quality of the performances and the emotional tension. One reason the movie remains interesting is that it focuses more on characters than on spectacle. There are violent scenes and criminal activity, but the movie is ultimately about people trapped by their choices. Terry's internal conflict is more important than the action itself. The supporting cast also adds considerable value. Robin Wright brings emotional depth to Kathleen, while John Turturro and the other supporting actors help create a believable world around the central characters. Every major character feels connected to the neighborhood and its history. State of Grace was released during a period when gangster movies were receiving enormous attention. It was inevitably compared with other major crime films of the era, particularly Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas. While both films deal with organized crime, State of Grace has a darker and more personal focus. It is less interested in showing the lifestyle of criminals and more interested in the emotional consequences of living inside that world. The movie's final act is where the tension reaches its highest point. The relationships that have been developing throughout the film finally begin to collapse under the pressure of secrets and violence. The ending feels tragic because the audience understands that the characters have been moving toward this confrontation for a long time. What makes State of Grace memorable is its combination of strong performances, realistic atmosphere, emotional storytelling, and excellent direction. It is not simply a movie about gangsters. It is a story about people who cannot escape the consequences of their past. Sean Penn provides the emotional center of the film, Gary Oldman delivers an unforgettable performance as Jackie, and Ed Harris creates a powerful and intimidating presence as Frankie. Together, they form one of the film's strongest elements. Overall, State of Grace, 1990, is an underrated crime drama that deserves more attention from fans of gangster and crime cinema. It may not have the fast pace or flashy style of some modern crime movies, but its atmosphere, performances, and emotional story make it worth watching. If you enjoy movies about organized crime, undercover police officers, childhood friendships, betrayal, loyalty, and dark urban environments, State of Grace is definitely worth adding to your watch list. This film. Directed by Joanou. Written by Dennis McIntyre. Produced by Dowd. Starring Sean Penn. Cinematography Jordan Cronenweth. Edited by Claire Simpson. Music by Ennio Morricone. Production company Cinehaus. Distributed by Orion Pictures. Release date September 14, 1990. Running time 134 minutes. Country United States. Language English. Box office $1.9 million.